The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into my wrists as Sheriff Sheila leaned in close, her badge catching the afternoon sun. My 12-year-old son stood frozen by the pool's edge, water still dripping from his hair, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Public disturbance is a serious offense in this town," she whispered, her breath hot against my ear, "especially when it comes from outsiders who do not understand our ways." Parents pulled their children from the water, whispering behind cupped hands. No one moved to help. No one questioned why a father was being arrested for simply defending his child's right to swim in a public pool. As the deputy led me toward the cruiser, my son called out, his voice cracking, "Dad, what did I do wrong?" I turned back, catching Sheriff Sheila's smirk as she placed her hand on my son's shoulder. That was when I noticed it, the slight movement of her fingers slipping something into his backpack. That is when I understood. This was not about rules or disturbances. This was about power, and I had just become its newest target. Small-town peace is not something you simply find. It is something you carefully build day by day, like stacking smooth stones into a wall that keeps the chaos of the world at bay. That was why, after the divorce papers were signed and the dust settled, I packed everything my son and I owned into a weathered SUV and drove east toward Millfield, population 4,217, according to the sun-bleached welcome sign that greeted us at the town limits. The divorce had hit Jacob harder than I anticipated. At 12 years old, he was old enough to understand what was happening but too young to know how to process the emotions that came with it. The late-night arguments, the tense silences, the eventual emptiness of our family home. It had transformed my once exuberant son into a quiet, withdrawn child who rarely smiled. "This is going to be good for us," I told him as we passed rows of oak trees lining Main Street. "A fresh start, just you and me." Jacob did not respond. He simply pressed his forehead against the passenger window, watching the storefront slide by like scenes from a life that had nothing to do with him. Our rental house was modest, a 2-bedroom bungalow with a small yard and peeling paint on the front porch, but it was ours, at least for now. The first week, Jacob barely left his room. I would hear him at night, the soft sounds of muffled crying drifting through our thin shared wall. I wanted to go to him, to tell him everything would be all right, but I knew empty promises would only widen the gap between us. It was Mrs. Winters, our elderly neighbor, who mentioned the recreation center. "That boy needs something to do with himself," she said one morning as she pruned her rose bushes. "Town pool just opened for summer. My grandkids practically live there when school's out." The next day, I convinced Jacob to come with me to check it out. The Millfield Recreation Center was nothing impressive, a squat brick building with a gymnasium, a few meeting rooms, and an Olympic-sized pool that smelled strongly of chlorine. But the moment Jacob saw that water, something changed. A small spark ignited in his eyes. "Can I go in?" he asked quietly, the first unprompted question he had asked in weeks. The following day became routine. Each morning, Jacob would wake early, pack his swim bag, and wait by the door, a silent anticipation radiating from him. At the pool, he would slip into the water and transform. The weight of the divorce, the burden of starting over, it all seemed to dissolve with each lap he swam. I would sit on the aluminum bleachers, laptop open but largely ignored, watching my son rediscover joy one stroke at a time. Other parents began to recognize us, offering friendly nods or casual conversation. Mrs. Patterson, whose daughter took swimming lessons on Tuesdays, shared town gossip and recommendations for the best place to get haircuts. Mr. Rodriguez, the high school math teacher, would sometimes discuss the local school system. "Your boy has a natural talent," the lifeguard, a college student named Marcus, told me one afternoon he could join our summer swim team if he wanted. For the first time since the divorce, I felt like we might actually be okay. The tight knot of anxiety in my chest began to loosen. Jacob was sleeping through the night again. He was talking more at dinner, even laughing occasionally. We were healing, slowly but surely, in this little town that was starting to feel like home. Then came that Thursday in late June. The day was perfect, cloudless sky, gentle breeze, the pool's surface sparkling like crushed diamonds under the summer sun. Jacob had just executed a near-perfect dive from the low board, surfacing with a triumphant grin directed my way. I returned his smile, offering a thumbs-up of approval. That was when I noticed the deputy approaching, a tall man with a military-style haircut and mirrored sunglasses that hid his eyes. His hand rested casually on his belt as he stopped beside my seat. "Sir," he said, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable authority, "I need you and your son to vacate the premises immediately." "Excuse me." I set my laptop aside, confusion replacing the contentment I had been feeling moments before. "Sheriff's orders. You need to leave now." "But why? We have not done anything." The deputy remained impassive. "Those are my instructions, sir. Please do not make this difficult." I looked around at the other parents. They were watching the exchange with interest but made no move to intervene. Some even averted their eyes when I caught them staring. "Jacob," I called out, my voice strained. "We need to go, buddy." My son's face fell as he reluctantly pulled himself from the water. As we gathered our belongings, I felt something twist deep inside me, a premonition that the peace we had so carefully constructed was about to be tested in ways I could not yet imagine. This was not over, not by a long shot. The next morning, I returned to the recreation center alone, determined to understand why we had been ejected from the pool. The front desk was staffed by a young woman named Tina, who nervously twisted a strand of hair around her finger as I approached. "I am looking for an explanation," I said, keeping my voice level despite the frustration simmering beneath the surface. "My son and I were asked to leave yesterday by a deputy. I would like to know why." Tina glanced over her shoulder as if checking to see if anyone was listening. "It was Sheriff's instruction," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "That is all I know. You would have to talk to Sheriff Dawson directly." "And where would I find Sheriff Dawson?" "Station is down on Elm Street, big brick building, cannot miss it." She hesitated, then added, "But maybe just wait a few days. Sometimes these things blow over." I had no intention of waiting. Jacob had asked me a dozen questions since yesterday: why we were kicked out, what he had done wrong, if we could ever go back. I did not have answers for him, and that was unacceptable. The Millfield Sheriff's Department was housed in a squared-off brick structure that looked like it had been built in the 1950s and not updated since. Inside, a dispatcher directed me to Sheriff Sheila Dawson's office after I explained my purpose. Sheriff Dawson was not what I expected. Instead of the gruff, overweight stereotype, she was a slender woman in her 40s with sharp features and blonde hair pulled back into a severe bun. Her uniform was immaculately pressed, the badge on her chest polished to a high shine. She did not stand when I entered, merely gestured to the chair across from her desk with a flick of her wrist. "Mr. Taylor, I have been expecting you." Her voice was smooth, professional, betraying no emotion. "Please take a seat." I remained standing. "I would like to know why my son and I were removed from the public pool yesterday." "There have been behavior complaints," she said, folding her hands on the desk. "Multiple complaints, in fact." "What kind of complaints? From whom?" Sheriff Dawson's eyes narrowed slightly. I am not at liberty to discuss the specifics of community complaints, confidentiality protocols. So you cannot tell me what my son supposedly did or who accused him of doing it. What I can tell you is that the recreation center has standards of conduct. When those standards are not met, there are consequences. I felt my patience wearing thin. My son has been swimming there every day for weeks without incident. What exactly are these standards he violated? The sheriff leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Mr. Taylor, you are new to our community. Perhaps things were different where you came from, but here in Millfield, we value respect, order, and proper behavior, especially from our children. I would like to see these complaints. There must be documentation, reports filed. Must there be? Sheriff Dawson raised an eyebrow. This is a small town, Mr. Taylor. We do not always need to drown ourselves in paperwork to maintain order. I planted my hands on her desk, leaning forward. So you are telling me my son has been banned based on unwritten complaints with no evidence or documentation? The sheriff did not flinch. I am telling you that perhaps your son would be better off swimming in your bathtub for the time being, or better yet, keep him at home if he cannot follow rules. Not everyone adapts well to new environments, Mr. Taylor. Some never do. There was something in her tone, a subtle threat, a dismissal, that made my blood run cold. This was not about pool regulations or community standards. This felt personal, targeted. My son has done nothing wrong, I said evenly. That is your opinion. Sheriff Dawson stood, indicating our conversation was over. Mine differs, and in this town my opinion carries significant weight. As I turned to leave, she added, "One more thing, Mr. Taylor. I would advise against making unnecessary waves in Millfield. Small towns have long memories and we look after our own, always have." The warning was clear, even if the reason behind it remained obscure. Walking back to my car, I found my hands were shaking, not with fear but with a slowly building rage. In the divorce, I had chosen my battles carefully, sometimes backing down for Jacob's sake. But this was different. This was about protecting my son from injustice. Sheriff Sheila Dawson might control this town, but she had just made a critical error. She had picked the wrong father to intimidate. My hands curled into fists in my pockets as I drove home, my mind already calculating my next move. This battle was just beginning. The official notice arrived 3 days later, delivered not by mail but by a deputy who knocked on our door just as Jacob and I were sitting down to dinner. The envelope was crisp white, the Millfield Sheriff's Department insignia stamped in blue ink on the upper left corner. "What is it?" Jacob asked, watching me tear open the envelope with apprehension clouding his eyes. I unfolded the single sheet of paper inside and felt my jaw tighten as I read. The letter was brief, formal, and utterly devoid of specific justification. To the guardians of Jacob Taylor, this letter serves as official notice that, effective immediately, Jacob Taylor is indefinitely suspended from all recreation center facilities, including but not limited to the public pool, gymnasium, and associated grounds. This decision has been made in accordance with community standards and the discretionary powers vested in local law enforcement. This suspension may be reconsidered at the discretion of the proper authorities. Signed, Sheriff Sheila Dawson, Millfield Sheriff's Department. Dad, Jacob's voice pulled me from the cold fury that had begun to build in my chest. What does it say? I hesitated, unsure how to explain to a 12-year-old that he had been banned from his favorite place for reasons no one would articulate. It says there has been a misunderstanding about the pool. We cannot go back for a little while. Jacob's fork clattered against his plate. But why? What did I do? Nothing, buddy. You did absolutely nothing wrong. I folded the letter and placed it on the counter, trying to keep my expression neutral. This is about adults and their rules, not about you. But my reassurances did little to soften the blow. Later that night, I heard soft sobbing from Jacob's room, the same heartbreaking sound that had followed us from our old life. I stood outside his door, paralyzed by a sense of failure. The pool had been more than recreation for him. It had been therapy, a place where the pain of the divorce receded with each lap. Now that sanctuary had been stolen from him for no discernible reason. The next morning, I called the parents I had become acquainted with at the pool, Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Rodriguez, and several others. Their responses were uniformly sympathetic but guarded. They expressed regret about Jacob's ban but were quick to change the subject or find reasons to end the call. Only Mrs. Patterson, after confirming I was not on speakerphone, offered anything resembling an explanation. "Listen," she said, her voice hushed despite being in her own home. "My husband works for the county. He says Sheriff Sheila has been running this town her way for years. The rec center is her personal project. She decides who belongs and who does not." "Based on what?" I asked. "Based on her vision of social order," Mrs. Patterson replied. "Look, I am sorry about Jacob. He is a sweet boy, but you do not want to end up on her list. Trust me." Her list. People who challenge her tend to find life in Millfield becomes very difficult very quickly. Parking tickets, noise complaints, health inspections if you own a business. Nothing you can prove is targeting, but enough to make you miserable. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the ban notice. The realization struck me with crystal clarity. The recreation center was not a public facility in any meaningful sense. It was Sheriff Sheila's fiefdom, a tool she wielded to enforce her personal vision of community, to reward compliance and punish deviation. Jacob emerged from his room, eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Can we go to another pool?" he asked hopefully. "Maybe in the next town over." "The closest one is 40 minutes away," I said, hiding the disappointment that washed over his face. "But we will figure something out, I promise." That evening, as Jacob picked listlessly at his dinner, I made a decision. Fighting Sheila directly, confronting her, demanding explanations, threatening legal action, would likely backfire. She clearly thrived on such confrontations, had probably built her power through them. If I was going to win this battle, I needed leverage, not noise. "Dad," Jacob's voice pulled me from my thoughts, "are we going to have to move again?" The question stunned me. In his mind, this rejection from the pool represented a larger rejection from the town itself, another failure, another loss. I reached across the table and took his hand. "No, buddy, we are not going anywhere. This is our home now." "But what if they do not want us here?" "Then they will have to adjust their expectations," I replied, a new determination hardening within me. "Because we are staying." After Jacob went to bed, I opened my laptop and began researching. I needed to understand the exact legal status of the Millfield Recreation Center. Who owned it? Who funded it? Who governed it? Town records were publicly available online, though poorly organized and clearly not designed for easy access. 3 hours and countless documents later, I discovered something interesting. The recreation center was not solely public property as I had assumed. It operated under a public-private partnership, partially funded by the town, but with significant investment from private board members who held controlling interest in the property itself. Sheriff Sheila was not on the board, though her cousin was. The pieces were starting to come together. Her authority over the center was informal, derived from personal connections rather than official position, which meant there were potential vulnerabilities in her power structure. I leaned back in my chair, a plan beginning to take shape. If Sheriff Sheila wanted to use institutions as weapons, she was about to learn she was not the only one who could play that game. But my weapon would not be intimidation or fear. It would be something far more powerful: ownership. The next morning, I called in sick to my remote job and drove to the county records office, a dusty room in the basement of the courthouse staffed by a single elderly clerk who seemed surprised to have a visitor. I requested every public document related to the Millfield Recreation Center, property deeds, board meeting minutes, funding agreements, everything. Research project, the clerk asked as she placed a stack of folders on the counter. Something like that, I replied, already flipping through the first folder. The documents confirmed what I had found online, but provided crucial additional details. The recreation center was indeed operated through a partnership between the town and two private investors: Gerald Hoffman, a retired banker who had lived in Millfield his entire life, and Michael Benson, the cousin of Sheriff Sheila and owner of the town's largest real estate agency. More interesting, however, was a notation in the most recent board meeting minutes. G. Hoffman raised concerns about personal financial situation and potential need to liquidate assets in near future. Gerald Hoffman wanted out, or needed out, and if that was the case, his share of the recreation center might be available to the right buyer. Finding Hoffman's address was simple enough. He lived in a well-maintained Victorian on the affluent north side of town. I drove there directly from the records office, but caution stopped me from knocking on his door. Sheriff Sheila likely had eyes and ears throughout the community. A direct approach could alert her before I had a chance to make my move. Instead, I formed a simple but effective plan. I established an LLC registered in a neighboring state, using a lawyer there to create a buffer between myself and any local inquiries. Then I had the lawyer contact Hoffman with an exploratory letter expressing interest in local investment opportunities, without specifying the recreation center. Hoffman responded within days, inviting my representative to discuss matters at his home. The lawyer went in my place, armed with a non-disclosure agreement and specific instructions. The meeting lasted 3 hours. When my lawyer called afterward, his voice contained a note of disbelief. "He is definitely selling," the lawyer confirmed. "Divorce settlement is killing him, and he has medical bills on top of that. He is asking $750,000 for his share." "Counter at $500,000, I instructed. "But make it clear we are serious buyers who can close quickly." The negotiations took just under 2 weeks. Hoffman eventually accepted $625,000, a sum that would require me to liquidate my stock portfolio and use most of my divorce settlement, but it was doable. We were moving toward closing when the first sign of trouble appeared. My lawyer received a call from Hoffman, his voice shaking with nervous energy. "Had a visit from Michael Benson and Sheriff Sheila today," he reported. "They asked a lot of questions about potential buyers, said there might be zoning issues if ownership changed hands. I did not tell them anything specific, but they are suspicious," I concluded. More than suspicious. Sheila mentioned that new owners might face enhanced regulatory scrutiny. Sounded like a threat to me. It was definitely a threat, but it was also a sign of desperation. Sheriff Sheila had caught wind that something was happening but did not know exactly what or who was behind it. She was firing warning shots into the darkness. I instructed my lawyer to accelerate the timeline. "Tell Hoffman we close this week or walk away completely." The pressure worked. 3 days later, with papers signed and money transferred, I became a one-third owner of the Millfield Recreation Center. My lawyer filed the appropriate paperwork with the county clerk that same afternoon, making the transaction a matter of public record. I was sitting at my kitchen table when the doorbell rang. Jacob was at a friend's house, one of the few who still invited him over despite Sheriff Sheila's apparent disapproval. I opened the door to find Sheriff Dawson herself standing on my porch, arms crossed over her chest. "Mr. Taylor," she said, her voice cool but her eyes blazing, "I believe we need to have a conversation." I stepped aside, inviting her in with a gesture. "Sheriff Dawson, what a surprise." She remained on the porch. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" "I am not sure what you mean," I replied, though we both knew it was a pretense. "The recreation center is not for sale to outsiders. According to the paperwork I signed this morning, one-third of it was very much for sale and has been sold, legally, properly." I leaned against the doorframe, remarkably calm. "Would you like some coffee, Sheriff? We are neighbors now, in a manner of speaking, partners even." Her jaw tightened visibly. "This will not stand." "It already has. The documents are filed. The money has changed hands. Perhaps you should direct your concerns to the board meeting next Tuesday. I will be there, of course, as a voting member." For a moment, I thought she might explode with rage. Instead, she mastered herself with visible effort. "You have no idea what you are doing or what you are up against." "Actually, I think I do," I replied. "I am exercising my right as an American to participate in free enterprise, and I am up against someone who has confused personal power with public service." Sheriff Sheila took a step closer, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "This is my town, my rules." "Not anymore," I said simply. "Not exclusively, at least. See you at the board meeting, Sheriff." As she turned to leave, I added, "Oh, and Sheriff, my son will be returning to the pool next week. Board policy." The look she gave me could have frozen water, but I found it oddly warming. For the first time since receiving that band notice, I felt a sense of true satisfaction. The game had changed, and Sheriff Sheila knew it. Word spreads quickly in small towns. By the following morning, the news that I had purchased Gerald Hoffman's share of the recreation center had traveled through Millfield like wildfire. Jacob heard it at his friend Dylan's house and came home wide-eyed with questions. "Is it true, Dad?" he asked, dropping his backpack by the door. "Did you really buy the pool?" "One-third of it," I clarified. "It is a little complicated, but yes, I am now part owner of the recreation center." "So I can swim again." The hope in his voice made my chest tighten. "Soon," I promised. "There are some things we need to sort out first." Those things began to materialize almost immediately. The day after my confrontation with Sheriff Sheila, cars parked on our street, including mine, received citations for improper street parking, though none of us had parked any differently than we had for months. Mrs. Winters found her garbage bins mysteriously tipped over and scattered across her yard. When she called to complain, she was told the department was too understaffed to investigate such minor incidents. The message was clear: support me, face consequences. 2 days later, Mrs. Patterson called in a panic. "My husband just got pulled over for the third time this week," she whispered into the phone. "Broken tail light, they said, but there is nothing wrong with his tail light. Everyone knows what is happening. It is because he told me about Sheila's control over the rec center, and she found out somehow." "I am sorry," I said, guilt washing over me. "This is not what I intended." "No," Mrs. Patterson's voice grew stronger. "Do not apologize. Someone needed to stand up to her. We are just not used to it happening." The first board meeting following my acquisition arrived on a Tuesday evening. I arrived early, dressed in a suit and tie, and took my seat at the conference table in the Recreation Center's small meeting room. Michael Benson was already there, his expression carefully neutral as I entered. "Mr. Taylor," he said with a curt nod, "I understand congratulations are in order." "Thank you," I replied, matching his formal tone. "I look forward to contributing to the center's success." "Indeed," Benson shuffled some papers, "though I should warn you board business can be quite technical, particularly for newcomers." The third board member, Mayor Wilson, who represented the town's interests, arrived next, followed by the Recreation Center's director and several staff members. Last to enter was Sheriff Sheila, though she had no official role in the meeting. She positioned herself against the back wall, arms crossed, clearly intending to observe. Mayor Wilson cleared his throat nervously. "Since we have a new board member, perhaps we should review standard procedures before beginning." "Actually," I interjected, "before we get to that, I would like to propose an addition to today's agenda." Benson frowned. "Agenda items must be submitted in advance." "According to the bylaws," I replied, pulling a copy from my briefcase, "any board member may propose an emergency addition to the agenda, subject to majority approval. Section 4, Paragraph 2. The mayor looked surprised that I had done my homework. "What is the proposed addition, Mr. Taylor?" "I would like to review the current policies regarding access to facilities, particularly the circumstances under which members of the public can be barred from entry." A tense silence fell over the room. Everyone present knew exactly why I was raising this issue. "I second the motion," Mayor Wilson said suddenly, earning a sharp look from Benson and an even sharper one from Sheriff Sheila. "Very well," Benson said tightly. "We will add it to the agenda, but first our regular business." The meeting proceeded with excruciating slowness, covering budget reports, maintenance schedules, and staffing issues. Throughout, Sheriff Sheila remained at her post along the back wall, her gaze fixed on me. I met her stare evenly whenever our eyes locked. Finally, after nearly 2 hours, we reached my agenda item. "As I understand it," I began, "there is currently no formal written policy regarding suspensions or bans from the recreation center facilities. Decisions are made on an ad hoc basis, often at the recommendation of certain local officials." I did not look at Sheriff Sheila, but everyone knew who I meant. "This arrangement has served the community adequately," Benson responded. "Has it?" I opened a folder and removed several sheets of paper. "I have here statements from 7 families whose children have been banned from the pool in the past year. None received written explanations. None were offered opportunities to appeal. All report being told it was sheriff's orders." "This is highly irregular," Sheriff Sheila suddenly interjected, pushing off from the wall. "The board does not typically entertain complaints from—" "I am not entertaining complaints," I corrected her. "I am proposing a formal policy for facility access and disciplinary procedures, as is my right as a board member." Before Sheila could respond, the door to the meeting room opened, and people began filing in, parents I recognized from the pool, business owners from downtown, even high school students. They filled the chairs along the edges of the room, their presence a silent but unmistakable statement. Sheriff Sheila's face darkened as she surveyed the unexpected audience. "What is this? Board meetings are not public forums." "Actually," Mayor Wilson interjected, consulting the bylaws, "they are open to observation by any interested parties, though only board members may participate in discussion and voting." I smiled slightly. It seems the community is interested in transparent governance, Sheriff. Now, about that policy proposal. As I outlined my suggested changes, clear rules, documentation requirements, and appeals process, I saw something I had never expected to see on the faces around me. Hope. Sheriff Sheila had ruled this town through informal power, whispered threats, and the deliberate absence of written rules she might be held to. That era was ending, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with the quiet, irresistible force of properly applied procedural authority. For the first time since moving to Millfield, I felt like this might truly become our home, a place where Jacob could swim free from fear, and where the rule of law meant more than the whims of one person with a badge. The week following my first board meeting was remarkable not for its drama, but for its quiet intensity. I spent every evening at my kitchen table surrounded by documents, recreation center bylaws, facility usage policies from neighboring towns, legal precedents regarding public access. Jacob would occasionally pass through, watching curiously as I worked, sometimes bringing me cups of coffee that he had only recently learned to brew. "Are you going to win, Dad?" he asked one evening, his voice small but hopeful. I looked up from my papers, considering my answer carefully. "This is not exactly about winning or losing, buddy. It is about making things fair, making sure no one can be kicked out without a good reason and a chance to tell their side of the story." "Like I was," he said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Exactly like you were." I reached out and ruffled his hair, "and no one should have to feel that way." By the time the next board meeting arrived, I had prepared a comprehensive proposal for new recreation center policies. The document was 15 pages long, professionally formatted with the help of my lawyer, and addressed everything from conduct expectations to disciplinary procedures to an appeals process. Most importantly, it removed the informal authority that had allowed Sheriff Sheila to make unilateral decisions without accountability. The meeting room was once again filled with community members, their numbers even greater than before. Word had spread quickly about what was happening, and people seemed eager to witness this small revolution in town governance. As I took my seat at the board table, I noticed Sheriff Sheila had positioned herself differently this time, not along the back wall, but directly behind the public seating area, where she could observe every face, perhaps nodding who had dared to show support for the changes. Michael Benson called the meeting to order, his expression carefully neutral. "We have a full agenda today, so let us proceed efficiently. Mr. Taylor, I understand you have a formal proposal regarding facility access policies." "I do." I distributed copies to the other board members and the center director. "This document outlines comprehensive procedures for conduct expectations, disciplinary actions, and appeals processes for all recreation center facilities." Mayor Wilson flipped through the pages, eyebrows raised. "This is quite thorough." "Necessarily so," I replied. "When we deal with matters that affect children and families, clarity and fairness should be our highest priorities." Benson skimmed the document with a frown. "This seems excessive. We have operated successfully for years without such bureaucratic constraints." "Have we?" I glanced around the room. "I count at least 12 families here tonight whose children have been banned from facilities without explanation or recourse. Is that what we consider successful operation?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Benson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "These policies would hamstring the center's ability to maintain order," he argued. "Actually," Mayor Wilson interjected, surprising us both, "I think these are reasonable safeguards. As the town's representative on this board, I am concerned about establishing clear standards that protect all our citizens equally." I had not expected the mayor's support. Sheriff Sheila clearly had not either, her face darkened visibly from her position at the back of the room. The policies still allow for immediate removal of any individual posing a safety risk, I noted. They simply require documentation and establish a process for review and appeal. After nearly an hour of discussion, debate, and minor revisions, Mayor Wilson called for a vote. To my surprise, and clearly to Sheriff Sheila's dismay, Benson abstained rather than voting against the proposal. Perhaps he recognized the shifting winds in town, or perhaps he simply did not want his opposition on record. Regardless, with the mayor's support and my own vote, the new policies were adopted. As the meeting concluded, parents approached me with cautious congratulations. Mrs. Patterson squeezed my arm and whispered, "Thank you for doing what many of us have wanted to do for years." Sheriff Sheila wasted no time in attempting to rally opposition. The following day, she appeared on the local radio station's morning program, speaking gravely about dangerous changes that would undermine discipline and safety at the recreation center. These new policies were pushed through by an outsider with no understanding of our community values, she declared. Parents should ask themselves if they want their children swimming alongside troublemakers who can no longer be removed. Her fear-mongering might have worked in the past, but something had changed in Millfield. Perhaps it was the transparency of the new policies themselves, which had been published in full on the Recreation Center's website. Perhaps it was simply that people had grown tired of living under informal tyranny. Whatever the reason, her warnings fell flat. The call-in portion of the program was dominated by voices supporting the changes. "I read the new rules," one caller said. "They just say kids get a warning first and parents get notified if there's a problem. What's wrong with that?" Another added, "My nephew got kicked out last summer for splashing too much." Splashing in a pool, these new rules make sense. 3 days later, Jacob and I stood at the edge of the pool, both of us nervous but determined. It was his first visit back since the ban, and though I had assured him everything was in order, I could see the worry in his eyes. "What if they make me leave again?" he whispered. "They will not," I said firmly. "The rules are different now, fair." Marcus, the college student lifeguard who had once complimented Jacob's swimming, spotted us and walked over with a wide smile. "Hey buddy, been a while. Water's perfect today." Jacob looked up at me, seeking reassurance. I nodded and he stepped toward the edge. "Go on," I encouraged. "It is all yours." He dove in with a clean, graceful arc, the result of all those summer days before the ban. When he surfaced, the smile on his face was radiant, washing away weeks of confusion and hurt. As he swam his first lap, strong and confident, I felt something catch in my throat. Behind my sunglasses, I allowed myself a moment of pure emotion. Not just for Jacob's joy, but for the victory it represented. Not a victory of vengeance or power, but of fairness and dignity. Because justice, sometimes, is simply the right to belong in the places that should welcome everyone equally. Sheriff Sheila was nowhere to be seen that day, but her absence spoke volumes. The battle was not over, I knew that. But for this moment, watching my son slice through the water with unrestrained happiness, I allowed myself to savor this one perfect victory. The peace lasted exactly 9 days. On the morning of the 10th day, I received a call from the Recreation Center director, his voice tight with stress. "Mr. Taylor, we have a situation here. The county health and safety inspectors have arrived for an unannounced inspection. They are finding issues." I arrived at the center 15 minutes later to find 3 official-looking vehicles parked outside. Inside, Men and women with clipboards and cameras meticulously documented every corner of the facility. Sheriff Sheila stood near the entrance, speaking quietly with a man in a suit who appeared to be leading the inspection team. When she saw me enter, she offered a thin smile. "Mr. Taylor, what a coincidence. I was just explaining to Inspector Garner about the recent changes in management here." The inspector barely acknowledged me, continuing his examination of what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary floor drain. "This drain cover has insufficient anti-entrapment protection," he declared, making a notation on his clipboard. "Safety violation." I approached the center director, who was following the inspectors with increasing dismay. "How many violations have they found so far?" I asked quietly. 17, he replied. "All minor things we have never been cited for before. Slippery tiles near the locker rooms. Improper chemical storage, though we store everything exactly as we always have. Inadequate safety signage." Inspector Garner overheard us and turned. "Minor violations can become major tragedies, Mr. Director, especially when management changes create oversight gaps." The implication was clear. This inspection was not routine. It was targeted, designed to punish the recreation center for my involvement and the changes I had implemented. "We will need to recommend temporary closure until these issues are addressed," the inspector continued, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. "Public safety must be our priority." Sheriff Sheila made a show of looking concerned. "Such a shame. So many children look forward to swimming in the summer." I maintained my composure, though anger burned like acid in my chest. "May I see the complete list of violations?" The inspector hesitated, then handed me his clipboard. I studied the list carefully, noting that every violation was either subjective, trivial, or had clearly been overlooked in previous inspections. "We will address these immediately," I said, returning the clipboard. "Our maintenance team can correct most of these items today." "Nevertheless," the inspector replied, "protocol requires closure until a follow-up inspection confirms compliance." "And when might that follow-up inspection occur?" I asked. "We are quite backed up, could be 2 weeks, perhaps longer." 2 weeks of closure in the height of summer would devastate the center financially and punish every child in town. It was a calculated attack, and Sheriff Sheila was barely concealing her triumph. I excused myself and stepped outside, making a call to my lawyer. After explaining the situation, I asked a simple question: "Who oversees the county inspection department?" The answer was illuminating. The county commissioners had ultimate authority over all county departments, including inspections, and the commissioners had recently been facing public pressure over selective enforcement of regulations. My next call was to a reporter at the county newspaper who had covered the recent board meeting changes. 20 minutes later, I returned inside, where the inspectors were preparing to place official closure notices on the doors. "Before you do that," I said calmly, "I would like to inform you that I have just filed a formal request for a comprehensive audit of the Sheriff's Department's interactions with this facility over the past 3 years, including all visits, citations, and removals ordered by Sheriff Dawson." Sheriff Sheila's head snapped toward me. "That is completely unnecessary and a waste of county resources." "Additionally," I continued, ignoring her, "I have requested a review of inspection protocols across the county, specifically focusing on facilities that have operated for years without citation, suddenly receiving multiple violations after management changes." The inspector's confident demeanor faltered slightly. "That is your right, of course, but it will not change today's findings." Perhaps not, but the county commissioner I spoke with was quite interested in why this inspection was conducted without the standard 2-day notice required by county regulations. Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the County Inspection Protocol, I believe. This was a bluff. I had no idea if such a protocol existed, but the inspector's expression confirmed I had struck a nerve. "We have discretion for surprise inspections when public safety is concerned," he said, less certainly. "And what prompted this specific safety concern?" I asked. "The commissioner would like that information for the record." A tense silence followed. The inspector glanced at Sheriff Sheila, whose expression had hardened into a mask of anger. "Perhaps," the inspector finally said, "we could issue a conditional notice rather than a closure order. Addressing the most critical items within 48 hours would be satisfactory." It was a retreat, and everyone knew it. Later that evening, my phone rang. It was Michael Benson, the board member who had consistently supported Sheriff Sheila's influence. "Taylor," he said without preamble, "this has gone too far." "I agree," I replied. "Using county resources for personal vendettas is a serious abuse of power." "Not that," he snapped, then paused. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "Look, I have known Sheila since high school. She has always been determined. But this inspection business, pulling strings with the county, targeting a facility used by children, it crosses a line." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because the town council has called a special meeting. They want Sheila to appear and explain her actions regarding the recreation center, not just the inspection, but everything. And they have asked me to testify." I sat back, momentarily speechless. Michael Benson, Sheriff Sheila's staunchest ally, was abandoning her. "And will you?" I finally asked. The pause stretched long before he answered. "This has gone too far," he repeated. "Yes, I will tell them everything I know." As I hung up the phone, I realized we had reached a turning point. Sheriff Sheila had played her last power card, and it had backfired spectacularly. The town council was finally taking notice, and the wall of silence that had protected her for so long was beginning to crumble. The town hall meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock on a Wednesday evening, but by 6, the parking lot was already full. I arrived early, securing a seat near the front, and watched as the room steadily filled with faces both familiar and unknown. Parents from the pool, business owners from downtown, teenagers who usually had no interest in civic matters. They came quietly, determinedly, filling every available chair until people were standing along the walls and in the doorway. Sheriff Sheila arrived exactly at 7, her uniform crisp and authoritative, her expression betraying no concern. She took her designated seat at the front table, facing the council members who sat elevated on a modest dais. I noticed she had brought supporters, 3 deputies in uniform and several older citizens who had benefited from her selective enforcement of town regulations. Mayor Wilson, who also served as council chairman, called the meeting to order with a solemn tap of his gavel. "Tonight's special session has been called to address concerns regarding the exercise of law enforcement authority in our community, particularly as it relates to public facilities and selective enforcement. Sheriff Dawson has been asked to provide information about recent events at the Millfield Recreation Center." Sheriff Sheila leaned forward into the microphone. "I am happy to clarify any misunderstandings. My department has always prioritized public safety and community standards, as is our duty." For the next 20 minutes, she spoke with practiced confidence about her department's commitment to protecting children, maintaining order, and upholding community values. She dismissed the recent inspection as standard procedure and characterized the new policies at the recreation center as well-intentioned but naive. Small towns like ours function best when leadership is decisive and values are clear, she concluded. I have provided that leadership for 15 years, and our community has been better for it. Mayor Wilson thanked her, then announced, "We will now hear from community members who have requested to speak." The first to approach the microphone was Mrs. Patterson, her hands visibly trembling. My husband received 4 traffic tickets in 1 week after I was seen speaking with Mr. Taylor. 4 tickets, after 15 years without a single violation. When I called to ask why, I was told to choose my associations more carefully. Next came a teenage boy, no more than 16, his voice cracking with nervousness. I was walking home from a friend's house at 9:45 p.m. Sheriff Dawson stopped me and said I was violating curfew. But our town curfew is 11:00 p.m. on weekends. She held me in her car for an hour, calling me a troublemaker, before finally letting me go with a warning. A cafe owner described health inspections that mysteriously coincided with his public disagreement with the sheriff over parking enforcement. A mother recounted how her son had been banned from the recreation center after a dispute with Sheriff Sheila's nephew. One by one, they came forward, ordinary citizens who had experienced the small, often undocumented abuses of power that had become Sheriff Sheila's trademark. Some stories were recent, others years old, but they formed a pattern that grew more damning with each testimony. Throughout, Sheriff Sheila maintained her composure, occasionally shaking her head in denial or whispering to her deputies. When Michael Benson took the microphone and detailed how Sheriff Sheila had pressured the recreation center board for years to enforce her personal vendettas, I saw the first crack in her facade, a tightening around her eyes, a rigid set to her jaw. Then it was my turn. I approached the microphone, feeling every eye in the room upon me. "I came to Millfield looking for peace and community," I began. What I found instead was a system of informal power that targeted my child without cause or explanation. When I sought answers, I was met with threats and intimidation. I described our experiences, the abrupt ejection, the vague accusations, the formal ban, then reached into my pocket and removed a small digital recorder. After my meeting with Sheriff Dawson, I became concerned that the conversation might be misrepresented later, so I recorded it, as is legal in this state without two-party consent. Sheriff Sheila stiffened visibly as I placed the recorder on the table and pressed play. Her voice filled the room, cold and clear. "I would advise against making unnecessary waves in Millfield. Small towns have long memories and we look after our own. Always have." I played a second recording, a voicemail she had left after learning of my purchase of the recreation center share. "You will regret fighting me on this, Taylor. I have ended businesses and driven families out of town for less. This is my town. You are just passing through." A heavy silence fell as the recording ended. Sheriff Sheila's face had drained of color, her eyes darting between the council members, assessing their reactions. "These recordings," Mayor Wilson said finally, "seem to contradict your earlier characterization of your approach to community leadership, Sheriff." Sheriff Sheila leaned forward. "Taken out of context, private conversations can be misleading. My commitment to this town is unwavering. Sometimes maintaining order requires firmness that can be misinterpreted." But the spell had been broken. The carefully constructed image of the dedicated public servant protecting community values had crumbled under the weight of too many contradicting voices, too many similar stories. The council deliberated publicly, their expressions grave. Even Sheriff Sheila's traditional allies on the council seemed troubled by what they had heard. Finally, Mayor Wilson spoke. In light of tonight's testimony, the council votes unanimously to initiate a formal ethics review of the sheriff's department's practices. Additionally, we are implementing a temporary suspension of Sheriff Dawson's authority over any non-emergency interventions at public facilities, including the recreation center, pending the completion of this review. The gavel struck with a sharp crack, and Sheriff Sheila rose stiffly from her seat. As she walked from the room, deputies following in her wake, the silence that trailed her was more damning than any shout could have been. Outside, in the warm summer night, people gathered in small groups, speaking in low voices tinged with wonder and relief. For the first time in years, they had spoken openly about the small tyrannies they had endured, and for the first time, they had been heard. I stood on the town hall steps, watching as Sheriff Sheila drove away, her cruiser's lights cutting through the darkness. The battle was not yet over. The ethics review would take time, and Sheriff Sheila still had supporters in town. But something fundamental had shifted tonight. The fear that had kept people silent had been replaced by something stronger, the power of shared truth. When I arrived home that night, Jacob was waiting up, defying his bedtime. "Did you win?" he asked, echoing his question from days earlier. This time my answer was different. "We all did, buddy. The whole town won." 2 weeks passed with Sheriff Sheila conspicuously absent from public view. Her deputies continued their patrols, but the random citations and intimidation tactics that had become commonplace ceased entirely. The Ethics Review Committee began its work, interviewing dozens of community members about their experiences with the sheriff's department. The stories they collected painted a picture of systematic abuse of power spanning years. Then, on a Tuesday morning in mid-July, the town awoke to unexpected news. Sheriff Sheila Dawson had submitted her resignation, effective immediately. The terse statement cited personal reasons and a desire to pursue other opportunities, standard phrases that masked the reality everyone understood. She had chosen to leave rather than face the findings of the Ethics Committee. There was no grand confrontation, no moment of public accountability where she acknowledged the harm she had caused. Like many small-town tyrants before her, Sheriff Sheila simply disappeared from the stage once her power was threatened, leaving others to repair the damage she had wrought. The news rippled through Millfield like a stone dropped in still water. At first, there was disbelief, then cautious celebration, and finally, a collective exhalation, as if the town had been holding its breath for years without realizing it. With Sheriff Sheila gone and Michael Benson newly cooperative, a unique opportunity presented itself. At the next Recreation Center board meeting, I proposed a restructuring of ownership and governance. The current arrangement leaves the center vulnerable to political influence and personal agendas, I explained. I suggest we convert to a community-based nonprofit organization with a broader board of directors drawn from diverse segments of our town. Mayor Wilson leaned forward, intrigued. What would this mean practically? The town would still provide public funding, but operational decisions would be made by a board that truly represents the community: parents, educators, business owners, seniors. This model has worked successfully in other small towns. The discussion lasted for hours, with lawyers eventually called in to address the legal aspects of such a transformation. By meeting's end, we had the framework of an agreement. I would donate my share to the new nonprofit entity, the town would maintain its investment, and Michael Benson would sell his portion at a reduced rate to complete the transition. 3 weeks later, the Millfield Community Recreation Center was officially established as a nonprofit organization with a 9-member board representing various stakeholders in the town. The old power structure, opaque, vulnerable to manipulation, had been replaced with transparent governance and clear accountability. To mark this new beginning, we organized a summer justice celebration at the pool, a free day of swimming, games, and community reconnection. The morning of the event, I arrived early to help with preparations, Jacob at my side eager to assist. The pool sparkled under the July sun, freshly painted boundary lines gleaming white against the azure water. Volunteers set up tables for refreshments, hung colorful banners, and arranged chairs for the brief ceremony that would officially open the event. By noon, the center was filled with families. Many I recognized, some I did not. Children raced around with unchecked enthusiasm, free from the atmospheric tension that had previously permeated the space. Parents chatted openly, without the nervous glances and hushed tones that had characterized social interactions under Sheriff Sheila's reign. A reporter from the county newspaper approached me as I arranged water bottles on a welcome table. "Mr. Taylor, could I get a statement about today's celebration? Our readers are following what some are calling the pool that fought back story." I smiled at the dramatic title. This is not really about fighting back. It is about building something better together. Sometimes communities need reminders that public spaces belong to everyone, not just those with the loudest voices or the most power. And what about Sheriff Dawson's resignation? Do you consider that a victory? I considered the question carefully. I consider it a fresh start for her and for Millfield. This town deserves leadership that serves everyone equally. As the celebration officially began, Mayor Wilson gave a brief speech about community renewal and shared responsibility. When he invited me to say a few words, I declined, preferring to remain in the background. This day was not about me or my role in recent events. It was about the community reclaiming its spaces and its voice. Later, as the afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, Jacob and I stood at the edge of the pool. He had spent hours swimming, playing with friends both old and new, but now he wanted me to join him for the final swim of the day. "Come on, Dad," he urged, his skin sun-warmed and chlorine-scented. "Just one lap." I looked at my son, really looked at him. The shadow that had haunted his eyes since the divorce had faded, the hurt confusion that had marked his face after the ban had disappeared. He stood straight and confident, at home in his body and in this place. "Lead the way," I said. We walked to the deep end together. Jacob dove in first, a clean, practiced arc that barely disturbed the water's surface. I followed less gracefully but with no less joy. As we swam side by side, cutting through water that belonged to everyone and no one, I realized that what we had built was more than a fair system or a protected space. We had created a template for belonging, a model of how communities can protect their most vulnerable members while holding their most powerful accountable. This was not just a pool anymore, it was home. Summer faded into autumn, bringing cooler days and the rhythmic return to school routines. Jacob entered 7th grade with a confidence I had not seen since before the divorce. He joined the school swim team, made new friends, and began talking about a future in Millfield, plans and dreams that extended beyond our next move, our next escape. The recreation center thrived under its new governance structure. The pool remained open on weekends throughout September, then closed for the season to undergo renovations that would improve accessibility for seniors and disabled residents. The gymnasium hosted new programs: youth basketball, adult fitness classes, community gatherings that brought together people from all corners of town. Most remarkably, citizens began volunteering their time and skills. Mr. Rodriguez, the math teacher, started a weekend tutoring program in one of the meeting rooms. Mrs. Patterson organized a seniors walking club that used the indoor track during inclement weather. A local artist offered free art classes for children on Saturday mornings. The center was becoming exactly what such spaces should be, a nexus of community connection, a place where the ordinary magic of human interaction could flourish unimpeded by arbitrary power or exclusion. One crisp October evening, as I was leaving the center after a board meeting, I found Mayor Wilson waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his car. "Got a minute, Taylor?" he asked as I approached. "Of course." The Northwest Regional Community Development Board has an opening. They oversee rural community infrastructure projects, grant allocations, that sort of thing. I have been asked to recommend someone. He paused, studying my reaction. Your name came to mind. I was momentarily speechless. The regional board was influential, with the power to shape development across several counties. "That is unexpected," I managed finally. Mayor Wilson smiled slightly. "Is it? You turned a simple recreation center dispute into a model for community governance. People notice these things." "I was just protecting my son," I said. "And in doing so, you protected everyone's sons and daughters." He handed me a business card. "Think about it. They could use someone with your perspective." As he drove away, I stood in the darkening parking lot, turning the card over in my fingers. When I had purchased my share of the recreation center, I had been focused on a singular goal: justice for Jacob. I had not anticipated how that single act would ripple outward, transforming not just the center but the town itself. I accepted the regional board position 2 weeks later. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying, helping rural communities access resources, navigate bureaucracy, and develop spaces that served everyone's needs. At each new town or county meeting, I carried the lessons learned in Millfield: about power, about resistance, about the quiet courage of ordinary people when given the chance to speak. As winter settled over our small town, bringing with it holiday lights and the first soft snowfall, Jacob and I established new traditions. Sunday afternoons at the recreation center became our ritual, swimming in the newly reopened pool, then hot chocolate in the renovated cafe area where community members gathered to chat, play board games, or simply enjoy the warmth. It was during one such Sunday that Mrs. Winters, our elderly neighbor, settled into the chair across from us, her eyes bright with mischief. "Did you hear?" she asked, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Sheriff Sheila took a job in a city police department 2 states away. Apparently, she has been asked to resign from that position as well. Something about excessive force complaints." I nodded, unsurprised but uninterested in dwelling on Sheila's continued downfall. Her shadow no longer extended over our lives or our town. "The new sheriff is working out well," I observed instead, changing the subject. "I see him at school events talking with parents, really listening." Mrs. Winters smiled. "Times change, people change, or they do not and they get left behind." As she moved to join another group, Jacob looked up from his hot chocolate. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Sheriff Sheila had not banned me from the pool?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Well, you would not have bought part of the pool. The rules would not have changed. Everything would be different." I considered his perspective, the simple wisdom of a child seeing patterns that adults often miss. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best changes. If she had not made that mistake, a lot of people might still be living in fear. Jacob nodded thoughtfully. So in a way, we should thank her. I laughed, surprised by the generosity of his thinking. Maybe not thank her exactly, but we can acknowledge that her actions created an opportunity for something better to emerge. Later that evening, as we walked home through gently falling snow, I watched Jacob run ahead, stopping occasionally to catch snowflakes on his tongue or make a hasty snow angel in a fresh patch of white. His happiness was complete, uncomplicated by the knowledge of how fragile such joy can be, how quickly it can be stolen by those with power and without conscience. I had come to Millfield seeking only peace and a fresh start. Instead, I had found a battle, a purpose, and ultimately, a home. Sheriff Sheila had tried to ban my son from the water that should have belonged to everyone. In fighting that injustice, I had not merely purchased a share of a building. I had helped reclaim the very concept of community from those who would weaponize it against the vulnerable. Now, watching Jacob's footprints mark the virgin snow, I realized the most profound truth of all. We did not just own the water now. We owned our belonging in this place. And that was worth every struggle we had endured.